After many years of study and experience with various spiritual cultures, I concluded that the concept of enlightenment, which is frequently not clearly defined, is generally a pie-in-the-sky religious illusion used to trap people into oppressive religions, spiritual organizations, and worship of false gurus. The notion of enlightenment is usually not clearly defined in these groups, but generally it's assumed to be a state of absolute spiritual perfection wherein one transcends all the pains of life. But if you look deeply into the lives of many who are claimed to be enlightened, you often will find that they have the same hang-ups, attachments, and pains as most people, and often even more so. What enlightenment really means for these groups is that certain people have risen high enough in the ranks of the spiritual organizations or religions to be officially declared enlightened by these organizations, or they've managed to successfully persuade enough people to believe that they are enlightened and that they are qualified to be gurus. Beliefs that these people are enlightened, while believing oneself to be not enlightened, draws people into these organizations in efforts to attain the alleged enlightenment that followers think they don't yet have. Since enlightenment is believed to only be attained by a rare few, the concept of enlightenment also traps people into negative self-esteem, believing they are never good enough since they haven't attained the elusive enlightenment. I don't think there's much scientific evidence that anyone attains absolute spiritual perfection, beyond which any improvement is impossible, or that anyone ever attains complete transcendence of all the pains of life. But even if there was, few who are claimed to be gurus represent such an ideal. But even if they did represent it, that wouldn't necessarily mean that you should join their religions or organizations and give up possibilities for your own independent discovery of more expansive forms of truth and meaning, more authentically your own, instead of passively submitting to the dogmas and pre-packaged ideas of others. While the conventional Eastern notion of enlightenment is questionable, what there really is and what really can be attained are varying degrees of wisdom and varying degrees of spiritual development of oneself in light and natural virtues rooted in the heart. By natural virtues, I mean becoming a good person by natural inclination rather than by external constraints. In other words, virtue naturally arising from the heart rather than through obedience to others or obedience to authorities or to conventional society. This development of oneself in wisdom, virtue, light, and also the truest happiness is known as Eudaimonia in Western idealist philosophy, from the Greek eu meaning well or good, and daimon variously meaning deity, angel, conscience, divine power, inner spirit, inner force, or inner genius. It's the happiness attained when an individual's best potentials for self-realization and goodness are realized fully. The daimon is perhaps most importantly thought of as the inner voice of conscience. The daimon as an inner voice of conscience can be strongly awakened to those awakened in spirit. In spiritual literature, this daimon is sometimes called the internal witness or the higher self. The daimon can recede from awareness if one falls back from spiritual awakening. In that case, part of spiritual practice is rekindling the daimon to awareness. In Eudaimonia, one's mind and life is harmonized with the daimon, whereas those in spiritual darkness may be out of touch with the daimon, so have to look only to external authorities as sources of ideas of the good and of ethical and moral rightness. The concept of Eudaimonia is, in my view, more realistic and is my idea of enlightenment. With this in mind, developing meditation skills can still be very important because Eudaimonia entails self-mastery over the body and over excessive restlessness of mind, and meditation definitely can help with this. I also happen to know the truth of the activities of the subtle body and the importance of becoming aware of inner light, which I discuss in other videos, and meditation definitely helps with this too. It's my view, though, that meditation must only be part of more comprehensive practices of developing in wisdom and virtue, and that these are covered by the 8 limbs of Raja Yoga and might also be covered by the Buddhist Eightfold Noble Path. But I don't want to encourage people to restrict themselves to dogmatic religious systems. There are definitely many other ways to approach development in wisdom and virtue than through Raja Yoga and Buddhist teachings. I've studied the Raja Yoga and Buddhist systems, but also found as much or perhaps even more inspiration from studying Western philosophical and wisdom traditions, such as the idealist philosophies of Plato and Plotinus, for instance, and the mystical writings of modern period greats like Emanuel Swedenborg and William Atkinson. My many years of experience with spiritual and religious organizations have shown me that they have strong tendencies and likelihoods of being rigidly authoritarian, and authoritarianism is oppressive and ultimately constrains rather than fosters spiritual self-realization. To realize your best potentials, you should not be forced to fit into anyone else's dogmatic boxes, but should develop your own uniquely authentic forms of spiritual expression. Religions and organizations tend to try to fit people into one-size-fits-all boxes, but the truth is that every person is unique, so they should be encouraged to avoid these one-size-fits-all boxes and find the forms of expression that truly suit them best. Nevertheless, many are attracted to authoritarianism because they want to be told what to think instead of facing the harder challenge of discovering truth for themselves. And submitting to authoritarianism is often the price of being accepted or belonging to groups. And discovering truth for oneself and learning to think independently and critically can be a much lonelier as well as a more difficult path. Erich Fromm explains this kind of attraction to authoritarianism in his book Escape from Freedom, by the way. But if you develop these critical thinking skills and independence of mind and spirit, and do discover your own authentic truth, I think the long-term rewards are much greater than the consequences of conformity to others' dogmas. Also, if you really look into the people who get most involved with these Eastern religions and guru organizations, you may notice that many, especially perhaps the Westerners who get most involved with them, have had more than the usual or average degrees of difficulty finding happiness, joy, peace, and beauty in the world, and often have had unusually troubled personal and family histories. They frequently join these groups seeking release from their unusual degrees of inner pain and look to enlightenment as a panacea cure for their pain. The religions often encourage their bleak views of the world by telling them that the gorgeous world of nature and the universe is mainly one of pain and suffering, or dukkha. This just isn't true. The amazingly spectacular world of nature is mainly one of beauty and joy. For most people with healthy minds, life may only be punctuated by periods or interludes of suffering, but with a healthy mind and with one's basic material needs met, life can mostly be joyful. The purpose of spiritual practice should not be about trying to escape from a natural world, falsely seen as bleak and miserable, but about developing in wisdom and learning how to avoid needless excesses of pain and suffering, and learning how to enhance one's happiness, joy, peace, and abilities to enjoy beauty in the world. People often needlessly increase their suffering through their foolishness and their excessive attachments or avarice. Spiritual development should be about learning to act with wisdom and how to have no needs to get caught up in the avarice. A mind and spirit developed in wisdom and light is rich with inner resources of happiness and joy, so feels no needs to be avaricious. A wise, joyful spirit also feels no needs to escape from nature to an alleged enlightenment. Enlightenment as Eudaimonia is generally happy and joyful in the world, so feels no needs to escape from nature And as Eudaimonia, enlightenment is harmonized with nature rather than in conflict or tension with nature. So it's my opinion that we should best seek Eudaimonia and freely develop expressions of our own unique spirits, but avoid becoming too involved with the spiritual organizations, religions, gurus, and the institutionalized Hindu or Buddhist quest for enlightenment traps. To sum up, I would say that due to the reasons I mention here, the Eastern notion of enlightenment usually really amounts to a needless burden seekers carry on their shoulders, and if they drop it, their burdens will be lighter.